It's been called the Devil's Triangle and Hurricane Alley. Travelers have disappeared in this stretch of the Atlantic for centuries. Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out more about the Bermuda Triangle. Hi friends, welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm Danny, your host, and today we are talking about the Bermuda Triangle. So last week we talked about the USS Cyclops, so this is the follow-up with that, and there's actually a follow-up to this one. It's like a 3-part series, although you don't have to listen to the other parts to understand this part, so here you go. So the Bermuda Triangle it's a real sketchy place, let's be honest. It's a 500,000 square mile area of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of North America. So more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes are said to have disappeared in just this past century, with roughly 1,000 fatalities in that stretch of time. So, and this area is like the size of Alaska. So it's not like a small little area. You got a big area with sketchy things happening all the time. And the boundaries of the triangle are not universally set. It's not like a perfect triangle shape, but it's roughly from Florida to Bermuda down to the Greater Antilles. So where exactly in Florida is up for debate, but most of the people kind of say around the Miami area, and the Greater Antilles include Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and it's not exactly set where in that region either, but most of the time people say San Juan, Puerto Rico is where that border would be. And then obviously Bermuda is basically universally set. There's all kinds of weird things going on in Bermuda. So disappearances have been happening here as far back as the days of Christopher Columbus. And I'm not saying that disappearances didn't happen before this, but first of all, we wouldn't have known about them. And secondly, this area wasn't well traveled because Christopher Columbus was trying to find Asia when he ended up in America. So they didn't even know that this land was over here, right? So when he discovered America, well, I guess if there were other people that tried to sail across the sea and find America, they may or may not have disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. Anyway, Columbus wrote in his journal while in this triangle in the North Atlantic that his compass was like off. He noticed that his compass started doing some weird things. On September 13th of 1492, he writes, "On the commencement of the night, the needle turned a half point northwest, and in the morning, they turned somewhat more northwest." He also wrote about the sea rising in a strange light out in the distance. He described this light as being a wax candle moving up and down. So I don't know. That's like an odd phenomenon. And the sea rising randomly might be explained away by science later on, and we'll get into that. But let's talk about Bermuda, because it's an odd little island. So Bermuda was first found on a map in 1511, depicted as Bermudas. And the idea was that Juan Bermudez discovered the island as early as like 1503. But I mean, there's no like set time when he discovered it. It's just that's what it was said. It's a nation founded on shipwrecks. So in 1609, the ship Sea Venture, headed for Jamestown, Virginia, were blown off course and their ship wrecked at Bermuda. And this was the first settlement on the island. So this was like when they first decided, like, oh, look, it's a place. Prior to this, the island was mostly like a warning place. People were told to stay away from the island, that only bad things happened near it. And they weren't wrong, because shipwrecks happened near Bermuda all the time. And it's still like, in my opinion, it's still kind of unclear as to why shipwrecks, things just happen at Bermuda. It could be back in the day they didn't have lighthouses and there's rocks around the island. I don't know. But in 1617, an Indian and a person of African descent were transported to Bermuda. And it's thought that they were intended to be slave divers to dive for pearls, although no pearls were ever found in or around Bermuda. So that wasn't successful. But the Virginia Company and its successor, the Company of the Plantation of the Somers Islands, set up a colony on Bermuda. And so during this time, the island saw so many immigrants. mostly indentured servants, passengers from shipwrecks, crews of captured enemy vessels, Native Americans, Africans, and quite a few Irish and Scottish political prisoners, which I was kind of like surprised about. I was like, really? The Irish and the Scottish are like just sending people. It was like Australia for, Britain, but here it is. The political prisoners of Ireland and Scotland are going to Bermuda. In 1684, the colony became administered by the crown, and it has stayed that way forever. They've actually recently, as recent as like 2003, they've been trying to get some independence from Britain, but then they realized that they won't have British like nationality. They won't have citizenship in Britain if they gain independence. So they've decided to just not at this moment. But in 1833, along with the rest of the British Empire, slavery was finally outlawed in Bermuda. I mean, it's, as with so many places, it was literally founded on slavery. And shipwrecks and slavery, it's a pirate island. So during the American Civil War, Bermuda was a staging area for blockade runners for southern ports. During the Prohibition era in the United States, rum was smuggled from Bermuda to the U.S., so that's kind of cool. In 1941, the U.S. signed a 99-year lease with Bermuda to have a military base on the island. However, the base closed in 1995. The British Army garrison, which dated back to 1797, was withdrawn in 1957. A Canadian base closed in 1993. A small remaining Royal Navy base closed in 1995. So basically by 95, all bases that weren't Bermuda did not exist on Bermuda anymore. And then the national flag actually has a shipwreck on it. It's an image of a ship smashing up against the rocks. So literally, shipwreck is just in the veins of this island. Everything about this island is all shipwreck based. Of course, now they have more tourism. People go and visit. Less shipwrecks. And actually, it's kind of interesting to note that only 0.02% of shipwrecks happen in the Bermuda Triangle. But here's the deal. I'm not that interested in the fact that shipwrecks aren't abnormally large in this area. My concern is that there are an abnormally large amount of disappearances and vanishing planes and boats that nobody seems to be that concerned about. I don't know. They're like, oh, shipwrecks happen all over the place. Yes, but planes vanishing all over the place doesn't just happen. Let's get into that. So I pulled out some of the most notorious and popular cases, and I'm going to go through them as quickly as possible. But there's quite a few that I pulled out because they're so interesting, and there's so much more I probably didn't put in this podcast, but it's really cool. So if you have a chance, look up the Bermuda Triangle, look up all these different cases. But here's just several. There's a lot of them, actually. So I started in the 1800s. So 1812, the Patriot was lost to the Bermuda Triangle. It was a schooner that was sailing from South Carolina headed for New York, but the ship never arrived. So aboard the ship was the daughter of Aaron Burr, who was the third vice president of the United States. And at the time, the War of 1812 was going on. Obviously, it was 1812. So it was suspected that perhaps the British mistaken the ship as a blockade runner and attacked it. Although there were no records to verify that suspicion. So kind of like last week when we talked about the USS Cyclops and how people thought that maybe, they gave it to the Germans, but there's no record. So I'm just assuming that everyone's keeping records of the ships they take, the ships they sink. I'm sure they want to brag about their war victories. In 1881, a ship called the Ellen Austin crossed paths with another vessel. So that the strange thing was that the vessel that they crossed paths with, which we don't have the name for, was completely empty. It was a ghost ship. So some of the crew from the Ellen Austin transferred to the ghost ship to sail it back to safety. However, a storm came and separated the ships, so they weren't together. When the Ellen Austin finally caught up with the ghost ship, it was completely empty again. None of the crew members that had gotten on were on board. No one was anywhere to be found. So I don't know what happened after that. Like if they were like, screw that ship, we're not messing around with that anymore, or if they still like tried to tie it to their boat and sail it back. I don't know how that would work, but it's very odd that literally the next day their crew got on, they got separated. The next day, the crew's gone. Where did the crew go? Like what happened? It was, let's call it 24 hours. Like that's not a lot of time. That's sketchy.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
In 1909, Joshua Slocum left the east coast of the United States headed for Grand Cayman for the winter. So he was sailing the boat called the Spray, and during his trip he disappeared and was never heard from again. So the thing is, though, that Slocum was the first man to sail solo around the world. So he did this in 1895. So almost 15 years before this. He was considered one of the best sailors in the world at this time. And he had actually rebuilt his boat, the Spray, that had been an old fishing boat for the trip around the world. So he built this boat that he sailed around the entire world by himself, rebuilt the whole thing. And then he was going from the East Coast just down to the Grand Cayman and just gone. It doesn't make sense that he would just vanish. He was obviously a very sailed sailor. And I'm not saying that you can't be skilled and still get hurt. I'm just saying it's very odd that he vanished. No one has ever heard from him and no wreckage has ever been found. Obviously, last week we talked about the USS Cyclops. If you haven't listened to that episode, we go more in depth, but here's just some cliff notes. In 1918, the USS Cyclops was making its journey from Rio de Janeiro, bound for Baltimore, Maryland, when the ship disappeared. So 309 souls on board and the ship were never seen again. The ship had the ability to send out an SOS signal, but no such signal was ever received by anyone. And this is the largest non-combat related loss of life that the U.S. Navy has ever seen. So again, we went over this a lot in depth last week, so go listen to that. I'm going to try to just move forward because these cases are freaking me out. So the SS Cotopaxi, I think I'm saying that right, was a large freighter carrying a load of coal from South Carolina bound for Cuba. and it just disappeared. Imagine that. So the Cotopaxi did send out a distress call before it disappeared. And in January of 2020, a shipwreck off the coast of St. Augustine was identified as the Cotopaxi. So it seems that the ship wrecked during a tropical storm. It wasn't in like the best condition when it wrecked, or like when it set sail. So it must have just sank. I don't know. And again, these are mostly disappearances. I didn't do a whole lot of shipwrecks. Shipwrecks can be explained away, and shipwrecks happen. I get that. So I tried to like steer clear of the shipwrecks because like what's the conspiracy there? A shipwrecked and like just disappeared, like didn't disappear, it just is in the ocean now. Or a plane wreck, like that happens too. These are straight up disappearances. There's no wreckage, there's no people, there's nothing. It's creepy. In 1945, Navy Squadron Flight 19, which is probably one of the most famous and actually made the Bermuda Triangle famous, disappeared. So it was 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, and they vanished during routine training mission. And what's even weirder is that a 13-man rescue aircraft was sent after these planes, because it's 5 different planes, all of them gone. They're all on this rescue mission. And then they send out another plane, like, where did our people go? And that plane disappeared too. There was a total of 27 people. I'm assuming all men because the time was 1945. So 27 men completely gone, and 6 planes gone. Disappeared without a trace. So I'm actually going to give you guys a little treat. Our anniversary for the Rabbit Hole podcast is on February 2nd. So I will be dropping a bonus episode for all of you that covers Navy Squadron Flight 19, because there are so many things that go into this, just these disappearances. So many different things that I wanted to give you your own little episode about it. So on February 2nd, no matter if you're in the fan club, whatever, it doesn't matter, you will be getting this episode. So stay tuned for that, because I'm not going to go into anything else here. 1948, DC-3 airliner NC 16002 was a transport plane carrying 29 passengers and 3 crew members when it disappeared. Do you see a pattern? The plane was flying from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami, Florida, so right on the line of the Bermuda Triangle. Before takeoff, though, the pilot had told the maintenance crew that the landing gear warning light was not functioning and the aircraft batteries were discharged. So I don't know exactly what they mean by aircraft batteries were discharged. Like, either they're working or they're not, I guess. But there's multiple batteries, so maybe you can use other ones. You'd think I would know this because I worked on planes. The landing gear warning light isn't the end of the world if you know that your landing gear is down, but if you you just have like a lot of confidence that your landing gear goes down, I guess. The pilot didn't want to do any of these. He didn't want to delay the flight for repairs. He was like, yeah, we'll fix it later. Which seems like something I would fix before leaving, but again, I'm not a pilot, and I'm not living in the year 1948. So air traffic control in Miami heard transmissions from the flight throughout the night, including a report that the flight was about 50 miles south of Miami. But the strange thing is, the transmissions were reported from New Orleans, so it is possible that the flight had drifted off course. But after that 50-mile check-in, nothing was ever heard from the plane again, and the aircraft was never found. So I don't know if they searched like this off-course section. I'm sure they probably did, because it seems odd that the plane, like, these transmissions are coming through, but they're coming through to Miami via New Orleans. So, I don't know. And so I feel like somebody would have reported if a plane crashed. But the plane would have been in the Gulf of Mexico if they were that off course. Anyway, I don't know. Plane's gone. Also in 1948, you had the BSAA, which stands for British South American Airways, Tiger Star aircraft. So this was a Tudor IV aircraft that took off from Lisbon, heading for Bermuda. But the plane had some engine trouble after they took off, so they returned shortly back to Lisbon. After a couple of hours of what I'm assuming is like engine maintenance, they got it all fixed, right? The plane took off again. They stopped to refuel in Azores and ended up staying overnight due to the weather. So they didn't plan on staying overnight there, but the pilot was like, it's not safe to fly. We're just going to stay here. We'll take off in the morning. And they did. They took off in the morning, even though there was still a windstorm. They took off anyway. Didn't matter. They were like, we can fly through wind. And they can. I mean, there's just turbulence, especially in 48. There was probably a lot of turbulence. So the next day when they took off, they were headed for Bermuda. Several hours before they reached Bermuda, the Tiger Star just disappeared without a trace. Gone. They never reached Bermuda. No wreckage, nothing. Gone. In 1949, the Star Ariel was also a Tudor 4 from British South American Airways. So this plane left from Bermuda en route to Jamaica. So they must have done a lot of flights with these Tudor 4s to and from Bermuda. So the pilot checked in after takeoff and reported that the flight was going smoothly. Everything was good, right? Shortly after that, he came back with another more cryptic message. He reported that he would be changing his frequency, which isn't a really common thing that is done. I mean, you absolutely can change your frequency, but typically the tower is on a set frequency and you would just go to their frequency when you're ready to talk to them. I don't know. Anyway, that's how I have understood it. Maybe it's been several years since I've been in the Navy, so I've forgotten a lot of things that I used to know. Just dumped it out. I didn't need it anymore. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Nothing was ever heard from that plane again. After he said, hey, I'm going to change my frequency, which is an odd thing to contact the tower about. You would stay on the frequency, whatever. A search party was deployed, but there was never any debris or wreckage or anything found. After the Star Ariel disappeared, vanished, whatever, British South American Airways stopped the production of the Tudor 4 aircrafts. Which, to me, I'm do you think it's the plane that's the problem? Or maybe because you're flying in the Bermuda Triangle? And all these things keep happening. But again, 1940s, they didn't really have the news network and the interconnection that we all have today. So maybe they did think that these planes just suck. I don't know. 1963, the SS Marine Sulphur Queen was a tanker carrying a load of molten sulfur and just happened to disappear off the southern coast of Florida. So the ship was in poor condition. So it probably shouldn't have been working at the time anyway, but that doesn't explain the loss of the ship and the 39-member crew, just gone. It could have been a result of the poorly conditioned ship, but I just have a hard time believing that no wreckage would have been found. They wouldn't have sent out, I mean, I don't know if they sent out a distress signal. I don't have all the information for all of these things. Like I said, bullet points, but it's just odd with all of these. You're telling me there's no wreckage at all. A plane went down and we didn't find any trace of it. A boat gone, all the people gone, no trace. That's it. Really? It's just weird. Okay, 1969 was the Tenmouth Electron. So this isn't a story about a disappearance as much as it is about a man going mad, because some people have this idea that if the supernatural powers of the Bermuda Triangle can make ships and planes disappear, then can it make a man go mad? And honestly, I think yes. So Donald Crowhurst was a businessman and relatively inexperienced sailor, and he set sail from London with intentions to win the Sunday Times Golden Globe race. So this event requires each contestant to sail solo around the world. So again, inexperienced sailor, but businessman. He's smart. So he hired an aggressive publicist and was backed by a demanding investor. So he knew he's got to get this guy his money back. This publicist is going to make him look good. Not a dumb guy. So he started his journey off real slow. He had so many problems. It was not looking good. But he continued to write to his publicist to tell him, things are looking good. Everything's great. Don't worry about me. I'm good. Although my question is like, how is he getting these letters off the boat and back to his publicist to like report how well he's doing? I don't have all the answers. I just like that was a question that popped into my head while I was reading this, cuz like what, you just like give it to a pigeon? I don't know. Anyway, he did like finally begin his journey back home, but when he did that, he found out that his closest competitor had sunk, and that kind of like freaked him out a little bit, you know? Cuz he started to like panic that the truth about his deceptions would get out, because let's say he was not a good sailor, he was not doing a great job, but he kept telling his publicist, who's an aggressive publicist, that he's doing great. That's not good. So, apparently, he took his fraudulent logbook and jumped overboard and drowned himself. Just gone. The Electron was found in the middle of the triangle in July of 1969, with the last entry in the accurate logbook dated June 29th. So he had obviously been lost for about a month or so. The thing is, like, how do we know that he went crazy and jumped overboard and drowned himself? Like, did they find his body? Or they're just assuming that he went crazy and jumped overboard. They're not assuming that he disappeared. Because remember the ghost ship? The ghost ship had no people on it. But the ship was still there. So how come that same thing couldn't have happened here? I don't know. I'm just asking the questions. 1978, you have the Piper Navajo, which was an Eastern Caribbean Airways plane piloted by Irving Rivers, and it left St. Croix, which is part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, headed for St. Thomas. So Rivers was a very experienced pilot, and he was making this flight solo because he was like trying to get the plane to St. Thomas to pick up passengers. So he was just going by himself. During the flight, the tower radioed Rivers to suggest an adjustment to his path to avoid some weather. Makes sense. Rivers like, cool, got it. He acknowledged and he made the adjustment. So, and they have him on the radar doing all these things. As Rivers neared the airport in St. Thomas, he was cleared for landing, and then the tower recalls like seeing his lights approaching. They're like, yep, there he is. Like, you know, we heard him. Now we can see him because you have the red light and the green light. So they see him. But then the tower had another plane taking off before Rivers was like planned to land. So they were paying attention to this other plane taking off. When they looked up, Rivers and his plane were gone. No sign of them. They were supposed to be landing basically right now. Nothing. No sign. So there was no longer any like sign of them on the radar. Nothing. So an emergency search effort was obviously launched right away, I'm sure, because they literally had eyes on. They could see him, and then he was just gone. But nothing was ever found. And this disappearance happened just a mile off the coast, just a mile from landing, right? And the tower had eyes on. Emergency efforts were put out right away. Nothing was found. That's crazy. No wreckage. Like, if it went down right there, you would have seen like some smoke. You would have found a plane. Where are they going? Where are all these planes and boats going? Where's everybody going? All these people. I have so many questions. In 1984, Flight 201 was a Cessna that left from Fort Lauderdale en route to Bimini Island in the Bahamas. So the plane was carrying just Cessna employees. So the pilot was a Cessna employee, the co-pilot, everybody, all the passengers were Cessna employees flying in a little Cessna. Imagine that. So not quite midway through the flight, the plane slowed its airspeed pretty significantly. And I mean, they didn't radio to indicate that something was wrong. It does seem odd that they would just like slow down all of a sudden. But then suddenly the plane just dropped into the water and completely vanished off of radar. Which, okay. But a woman on Bimini Island did say that she saw the plane fall into the sea about a mile offshore. But no wreckage was ever found. Nothing was found. It's so weird. 1991, you had the Grumman Cougar jet. So this one is kind of like the Malaysian flight, but like a little bit different. So the pilot had just talked to the tower and told them that he was going to ascend to 29,000 feet when the plane just vanished. Gone. So there were no blips on the radar to show like debris was falling. There was no wreckage, nothing. He was on the radar 1 minute, next, they were just gone. You have the 1999 Genesis freighter, which sailed out of the port of Spain bound for St. Vincent in the Caribbean Sea. The ship was carrying like concrete slabs, bricks, and like water. They needed water bad. So a nearby freighter heard the distress call from the Genesis. They did. So apparently they were having issues with the bilge pump. The bilge pump pumps accumulated water from the bilge back out to sea. And if it fails, then the engine room floods and the ship will sink. And then the crew like may or may not have enough time to abandon ship. It's not really clear if they do, but that's what your bilge pump. It's really important. You need that working. So whatever happened between the time of the distress call and the time the ship got to where the distress came from is a complete mystery because the cargo ship was never seen from or heard from again. Which, if you have a plane, or not a plane, excuse me, a boat that is sending out a distress call that's, sinking, you think that you'd see something. Like, you'd see some floating things. You would see, like, yes, the ship is going down, but things are going to come off the ship. Like, things should be floating around in the ocean. I don't know. I guess I've never seen a shipwreck in real life, so I wouldn't know. Then we have two in 2003. So you have a 16-foot fishing vessel that vanished. So a couple left from Boynton Beach Inlet in Florida on their new fishing boat, and they were just never seen again. That's it. It was just gone. And yeah, it seems small and like easy to sink. So okay, maybe we'll easily explain that one away. Fine. But then you have this fishing boat. It's called What's Left, which is kind of ironic. But the fishing boat was found on a beach near Cape Canaveral. But on the boat were the remains of the boat owner, Gary Lisk, and he was 61. The thing is, his fishing partners, companions, pals, was Neil Edelman, who was 47, and his son, Neil Allen Edelman, who was 13. And they were not found. They weren't with the ship. They weren't nothing. But the other thing that's really strange is that the trip that they had planned would have taken the trio about 65 miles southwest of Naples in the Gulf of Mexico. And the boat washed up 400 miles away from where they launched the boat into, like, it's weird that the boat ended in the ocean instead of in the Gulf of Mexico where they were supposed to be. It's weird that the boat washed up 400 miles away, but at least in this case, you have a boat, you have the owner, you have at least two out of the four things, right? You got the boat and the owner. You're still missing the remains of two people. It's still odd. Let's be honest, it's still odd. So you have a couple like explanations, right? People tried to explain this away. So you got the sargassum. So sargassum or sargassum sea is an algae that grows in the open ocean, and this algae has been known to just stop ships in their track and won't allow them to move, and they could be stuck there for a long time. So that could potentially cause a ship to sink. It does grow in huge swaths, so it's not easy to maneuver in and out of. And this could account for why ships have sunk in the Bermuda Triangle, but it doesn't really explain why ships and planes have disappeared. Again, they have all these scientific answers to what's going on, but that's not explaining the real question as to where are these, is this a realm to another, is this like a portal to another realm? Like, what's going on here? I have so many questions. Another theory is like rogue waves, right? So we kind of heard this at the beginning with Christopher Columbus, and he would say waves would just randomly pop up out of nowhere. That's what a rogue wave is. So these are waves that get into a rhythm of sorts. So the wave is much normal or much larger than normal, and it will appear just out of nowhere. So you'll just be sailing along, and then all of a sudden a huge wave will come in. You're like, what the heck? That was way out of character. What's a rogue wave? So that happening to Christopher Columbus, that does explain that away. Okay, fine. That doesn't explain why his compass started acting weird and why he saw that light, but that does explain the sudden change of sea, but that still doesn't explain why planes and boats are disappearing. Then you have the methyl hydrates, which are like gas bubbles that would come up from the ocean floor and create a hole that a ship would just like fall into. Which again, it accounts maybe for some of the disappearances, absolutely, of ships. So, okay, cool. We've checked that off. But we are still missing planes and people on them. Full on planes. So maybe these methyl hydrates, they create this hole in the water and just swallow up a boat. So we wouldn't have any wreckage. Fine. Okay, you got me. You're not explaining away the planes disappearing. I have no idea where these people are going, or these planes. Is it like a manifest situation? Are they going to randomly show up and be like, oh, it was, it's still 1945? Because that would be crazy. If you haven't watched Manifest, it's a really good show. It's about this plane that disappears and they show up 5 years later, but for them it was just like the plane ride. And they are completely baffled as to why, people are so excited to see them and why everyone's aged 5 years, because they've been gone for a long time. And actually I think that happened over the Bermuda Triangle as well. All I'm saying is something weird is going on. And if you don't think it is, well, you haven't been paying attention to my podcast, obviously. But that's it. That's what I got. That's it. I'm going to leave you with more questions than answers, that's for sure. I feel like I do that every week, though. Do you have more questions? Because send them my way. But of course, my friends, until February 2nd, which is our anniversary, I'm so excited. Stay skeptical. And I actually have 2 surprises for you on February 2nd. So make sure you listen to that episode. It's going to be about the Flight 19s, which will be really good. But I have a whole new surprise for you. So stay tuned, my friends, and I'll see you soon. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.